Jesse Peretz, director of City on Fire, which is based on Garth Risk Hallberg's novel. How familiar were you with the book before you joined the show?
I was not, I mean, I think I had heard something about the book, but I had not. I read the pilot script and the whole sort of show Bible before I actually read the book. And the book is mammoth. I mean, it's a really it is a really fun read, but it is a real undertaking at, like, I think just shy of 900 pages.
Mhm.
But it was, so it's funny because people keep asking me about the choices to update the book from the 70s into the early aughts, and I'm always like, well, that was, to me, I sort of learned about it being that the book originally took place in 1977, only sort of after signing on to the project. But it was really fun to sort of recreate the early aughts, and which is a period that I definitely was enjoying, the city that I still live in right now, New York City.
Yeah, same. I actually love the update to 2003, which is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Insane to think about, but well, when you think about it, like this New York City itself doesn't look that much different between now and then, but the vibe is so different.
Yeah.
And obviously not the same technology as there is now. So how did you guys, you and Josh Schwartz and Stephanie Savage, the showrunners, go about recreating that time period?
Well, I mean, I do think that, it being just a slight period was very helpful in terms of, like, we definitely had a sort of, we were sort of carrying around when we were on location, a good sort of 6 to 15 cars from the late 90s, that, we would put in the sort of more prominently in the frame when we were sort of out on the streets or whatever. But for the most part, we just sort of let traffic go and crossed our fingers. And then, there were people sort of keeping an eye out to make sure there wasn't like a real obvious
No iPhones and stuff.
yeah, oh yeah, no iPhones for sure, but no, like, Teslas prominently hovering in the frame or whatever. I mean, honestly, the thing that was the most difficult, and I think is actually the most difficult, even if it's not period for everyone, is that the city is like filled with all of those street restaurants that came out during COVID, which the New Yorker in me doesn't want to go away, but the filmmaker in me oftentimes wishes they would disappear. There are definitely locations where, like, oh, this is totally perfect, except for you can't pan because you hit that outdoor restaurant thing. So.
Well, you guys, there's a whole story component with the downtown music scene, the nightlife, which is also so different too. And a lot of the story takes place at Don Hill. So what was it like recreating that and making it look good?
I mean, for me, that was one of the particular joys when we got the go ahead to use Don Hill's and opened the door and found that it was basically Don Hill had died like 12 years ago, and they basically just put a lock on the door. Like, it was exactly what it always was.
Oh.
That for me was, I mean, I'm gonna sound like it's an embarrassing thing to say, but I probably spent like at least 150 nights in that club in the 90s. Not so much by 2002. I think I maybe wasn't going quite as frequently, but like it was a regular part of my 20s nightlife for sure. And so it was very exciting to see it in the script, and then even more exciting to actually be able to shoot in the actual place. And there I found myself like a typical middle-aged person, sort of waxing on to my young cast about all the great nights that I spent there, and watching them smile like a dotty old man who but anyway, so but I I definitely I was in a rock band in the 80s. I mean, I left in 1991, but I was definitely heavily in the rock world. And so like for me, one of the funnest things was not only getting to shoot in there, but sort of shoot a rock, shoot a sort of small club rock show, which is like really where I spent sort of a huge amount of my sort of younger adult years and teenage years, and I have very strong feelings about sort of how to do that effectively, and not, and sort of things that never, and oftentimes feeling things in clubs don't really feel like how they actually feel to be in clubs. So that was that was sort of a particularly fun part of
Yeah,
shooting.
you could definitely feel that, like all the ex post facto concert
Yeah,
scenes,
exactly.
and then like all the flashing lights. It's like it's really like you're back there, because I think even now the those type of concerts and those types of clubs are different. So, but
Yeah.
Jemima Kirk, we have a girls reunion here because you worked on Girls, but she's also said that she spent quite a bit of time in Don Hills back in her day too. So we're
I know.
also reuniting with her
She
on
was
this.
in high school. She was in
Yeah.
high school in those years where I was at least at least proper adult. Yeah, I know. I think it was a real bummer for her to like to realize like, oh, we're shooting this show that keeps going into this club that was such a like centerpiece of her social life when she was younger. And now she unfortunately is playing like the mother role who doesn't get to go. Anyway, I feel like she's been very funny talking about about sort of not being written into those scenes for obvious reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I also feel like her character Regan, it was kind of a wink to Jessa, her
Yeah.
girl's character, because um she has a line in there after she finds out her husband has an affair, like I was that girl, that like
Yeah.
girl. So was that something you guys were trying to put that in there, like sort of like an Easter egg?
Well, I don't think that, I don't think we were consciously trying to do a callback to Girls, but I do think, I think Jemima was, we were, to be honest, that was like kind of the one of the harder roles to cast. And we were sort of, it was written, I think it was sort of the original conception of Josh and Stephanie's was someone that was a little more kind of uptown type A, like the more sort of put together Regan, who just is cracking at this point in her life. And we weren't really loving the people that were coming in that were sort of playing the character as written. And Stephanie credits me with coming up with the idea of Jemima. I believe that it was Stephanie's idea. Stephanie really does love she does love kind of a bit of like a rascal bad girl. And so anyways, in my recollection, my version of the story is Stephanie saying Jemima, and me immediately thinking, oh my God, that's so exciting. And I knew that Jemima would bring a kind of edgier and an edgier version of that character. And what I think we learned in our first days of working with her is that she really had an interpretation of that character where you could see that the younger version of Regan was much more like her brother and wasn't so like pulled together. And I actually think that it ended up like adding more sort of depth and complexity to the character, to think that like once upon a time she and her brother were more kind of rebellious and on the same page and not feeling comfortable with this sort of wealthy waspy uptown family that they were born into, and that she did make this choice to sort
Yeah,
of
their paths diverged. They made it.
yeah, and that she had made a choice to being like, I'm gonna be daddy's girl and be the young woman that he wants me to be, but that there's a part of her that was always sort of connected to a different path that her brother took, that she could have taken, something like that. And anyways, to me, that was like kind of part of the magic of ending up with her in that role. And I think Josh, Stephanie, and myself, I think we all really felt like it was actually a sort of fortuitous upgrade in the sort of depth of what that character became.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jesse, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for
Nice
your
talking to you.
time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye.
David Paul Meyer, director of The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. You and Trevor go way back, I believe, about 16 years. When did he tell you that this would be the last season?
I mean, we all kind of found out together when he announced it during taping of the episode where he announced it. That was pretty much when we found out. I mean, I've known him for a long time. I could tell that he was certainly thinking about it, but I had no inclination of it being then. I kind of thought it might be in a couple of years, but yeah, I found out when pretty much
When the world did.
Yeah.
You didn't get a heads up from him.
No. He was like, he told me after, he's like, well, I didn't want you to like get nervous about directing it then. And I was like, well, so you're just going to surprise me and I'm going to direct like live. This was not in the rundown, you making this announcement. So you're just like sitting there, like still calling the show. But yeah, no, it was a surprise for sure.
Mm-hmm. So how did you deal with that? Because he didn't give you the heads up.
In the moment or in the bigger picture of things?
In the moment.
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, it just, kind of relying on instincts at that point and still just trying to be, I mean, I recognized that there was a moment happening here, and that it was important to him. And I've worked with Trevor for a long time, and I've always really tried to follow his lead in terms of his as a performer, and sort of capture his rhythm the best that I can. And I think I've had a lot of success doing that with him over the years. So there was that habit of being prepared for whatever with him that allowed me to sort of stay with it. But it was really one of those things where it's like, you know what, just have camera 2 center up and just let him say what he needs to say. That was pretty much most of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then just capturing the reaction of folks at the end. And just fighting back a few grown man tears while he was saying it. That was the goal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, then in the larger scheme of things, you have a couple months left. So what do you guys have these like longer picture discussions about what you want that final show to be, or is that something you talk about in like the final week?
I mean, there was some discussions, but the Daily Show's that's still Daily Show, so there's still things happening. And as that date approached, we certainly got a little more specific. We knew that we wanted to feature the correspondents because they're such a big part of the show, and we have such a unique set of correspondents that's just very diverse and inclusive in terms of the people and also their thoughts, and them together with Trevor really captured the essence of the Daily Show. So we knew we wanted to feature all of them. That was the big thing, and knew that Trevor would want to speak from his heart on the last episode, and kind of knew that was going to be a big part of it. And then, yeah, that was, and then a lot of it the day of, in terms of the last minute writing, what jokes were going to be written, how were we going to block it, because we were going to have everybody out there moving through the stage at once. So there was a flurry of things, but also in that last 2 months, the show went on the road still. We did a week of shows in Atlanta, and that was a totally different version of the show versus in New York. I mean, the show, even though we're on every day, 4 days a week, and it's Trevor at the desk, the show varies so much every day, day in, day out. So certainly, even in the confines of our studio in New York, every day was still different. And certainly then when we went on the road and did a week of shows in Atlanta, that was different. So many different challenges, so many different elements to consider for how we were going to interpret the script every day. So there was a lot. There was plenty. So there wasn't a whole lot of time to just sit there and be sad about him leaving.
Yeah, because it's still like business as usual, and like you said, you're responding to news every day, so it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's probably good you didn't have time to think about the end. too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. No, it was, we still have a job to do here. And I think the best way to show Trevor that we appreciate all he's done for us is to make sure that these last 2 months, every show is special. And I think that's what we did.
His final speech, I think it's about like 20 minutes, it's very long. Did he give you any idea what he was going to say, or it was just like the same thing, you just knew he was going to speak and you were going to shoot him for the full 20?
He was pretty, I think it was important for him to kind of have his own process with that. I knew some of the beats very vague, maybe right before, but again, I rely on my experience with him. I direct Trevor's stand-up specials as well. So I've seen his process I've probably seen it more than most, I guess, in terms of how he comes up with material and how he speaks from the heart, and just kind of being with him and being around him for so long, I kind of can anticipate how it's going to be. And yeah, so it was like, okay, he's going to sit there and he's going to talk, but it's going to be more in the style of probably him as a performer. Even though he's seated, it's going to be him, he's not going to have prompter. He's going to be speaking from the heart, and it's going to be more like when he's doing stand up. So I kind of slipped into that mindset a little bit more in terms of editing and, or calling the line cut rather, when he was performing it, and just knowing how to cover it and when to go for a close up or something, from the side, or knowing who was there that day, because he did call out some people in the audience, and knowing to have that ready in terms of like, he gave a shout out to Doug Herzog and Michelle Gainless and Jen Flans, our showrunner, and Chris McCarthy, so knowing who was there, where people were sitting, and just being ready to sort of anticipate and just really lock into what he was saying and really listening. And I think a lot of times when you're in the control room and you're sitting there, I think oftentimes with control room directing, it's sort of pigeonholed into this. Well, it's just very technical and you just have to like call this and call this, but there's so much of it that's not, and very abstract, especially with Trevor, where you have to just kind of listen and really move with what he's saying and where he's steering the conversation. And that was pretty much what I did on that last show when he gave his 20-minute monologue there.
Yeah. He also gave you a shout out. He called you, I think, a cowboy and a guru.
Yeah, he did. It's a kind of a funny combo. I mean, I'm from North Carolina, so we're a little more, I don't know if we're necessarily cowboys, but maybe. I mean, we're definitely like Southern. And so I think kind of in his world, he puts it all in the same bucket. So I'll take it. I like cowboys, so I was fine with it. And then Guru, that one also, I thought the other David was going to get Guru, but he gave me both of those, and then he just did an impression of David Kabuka, which was very accurate. But yeah, it was nice for him to recognize that, because I'm very proud of the journey he and I went on as friends and creative partners. So it was cool. It was great. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously you know Trevor so well, and like you said, you can anticipate his beats and what he's going to do. But when it's like a celebrity guest and they're telling a long story and you don't exactly know what they're going to say, maybe they didn't reveal it in the pre-interview or something. So how do you know when to do a close-up, when to pull back? Is it just listening to what they're saying?
Yeah, I really do think a lot of it comes down to listening to what's being said. And you can, after you've done enough interviews, you can sort of get a feel for, I always think, say in probably the first 30 seconds to a minute, you can kind of feel out what the style of interview is going to be. Is it going to be the host is asking a question and then we're on the guest for a long time talking? Or is there going to be a lot of banter back and forth? Or is it going to be almost like jazz, how they're like finishing each other's sentences or interrupting, or you think they're going to finish the question and then not? So you kind of get a feel for what the style of interview is going to be in the first, I would say, like I said, 30 seconds to a minute. And then I try to make sure that the coverage, it's weird. It's like, I feel like part of it has become like a study in language and like sentence structure. And so when you start to hear this phrase, or when you start to hear you do, and then they're going to give a bit of their the person's bio, you can cut to that person for a listening shot for like 10, 15 seconds and get that real reaction. Hear the guest reflecting on their own body of work or whatever. I like to try to catch those moments of the not just the guest talking, but the guest listening. And I think, it just comes from being fully engaged in what is being said, while also sort of playing your instrument, which is calling the line cut and talking to the cameras at the same time, and knowing where you can give direction and not miss a key point. And it's always, it's something that you always can get better every day. The fact that the show is every day, you have a lot of opportunities to hone that, because it's not, sometimes you got to say market and then you go into the edit later and pull up the shot or whatever. But I always like to see it as a challenge of, can I lock into the rhythm of this conversation and have the line cut reflect what's being said. So but you're right. The listening is the key, listening to what is being said and really digesting what's being said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like instinctual too. So yeah. Well, lastly, quickly, do you have any new stuff with Trevor coming up? I think he's still doing his specials. Anything else coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to work on stuff together. He's on tour right now. He's touring the country. He's going to be doing stuff internationally. I think he's doing another special this year in South Africa that I've done the previous one, so that may be something that I'm part of. We'll see. And then we've got a few other projects in development that luckily Trevor's got a lot of great interests, be it stand-up or docuseries or narrative film. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with him on a few of those things. It's going to be fun.
Can't wait. Well, Dave, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back here in a little bit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Jay Bayona, you directed the first 2 episodes of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. I know you reread the books again when you started working on the series. So what ideas did you glean from that reread?
To me, I think it was important because I read the books when I was a kid. And then I read them again when I was 14, 15. It's very interesting how you get different things depending on the age you read them. That tells you how rich are the books, but coming from there, to me, it was a way of going back to the spirit, trying to be faithful and discovering how was the writing in order to put that on the screen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you really have to set the tone for the whole series and its IP that millions of people are familiar with between the books and the films, but we're also getting the second age, which hasn't been portrayed in media yet. So what was the pre-production like, and just creating these worlds from scratch that we haven't seen yet?
Yeah, to me, I was very impressed about the ambition of the show, because I got there. It was probably no more than 9-10 months before we started to shoot. And in that time, we had to create all these worlds from scratch. As you said, it was a second age. So it was a time that never had seen, that we haven't seen before on the screen. And it was like 4 different kingdoms, lots of characters. You have to do all the auditions, all the castings, and we have very few time. We have like less than 10 months. So it was a huge amount of time. To me, it was important not only to be faithful to the writing, and that was on the script. I mean, I really loved the scripts, and I saw the love and the care that Patrick and JD, the showrunners, had for Tolkien. It's also the fact that it's a very visual storytelling when you read Tolkien. And in that sense, I was very obsessed in trying to capture that, trying to fit that kind of storytelling into a television format, and that took us we have very few time to do that. But I had a great team. I have a very great costume designer, a great production designer, great cinematographer. So I was surrounded by very talented people that did my work a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. You did use a lot of gorgeous, vast landscapes, kind of to, I feel like, to convey the epicness of these places before we get an up close of the characters. So what was it like just composing those shots when you're situating the viewer in new worlds?
Yeah, it was always go back to the books and see how the landscape reflects the character, the mood of the story and the characters. And I remember that one of the exercises that I did is I sat down with a couple of artists and I did like one pass on the script. Every single scene, we created like a visual image that will make that scene specific, you know. And in that sense, I remember that we have a room full of all those images. And from there, we had a reading of the story that was a visual reading. I was very obsessed in trying to capture that beautiful storytelling that you can find in the books. It's not only about the depth of the characters and the poetry, it's also about the visuals, you know, and the importance of the landscape, nature, all these elements that we try to capture in every single scene with very specific images.
Mm-hmm. What kind of inspirations did you guys use for each world? Because I know that you guys use a lot of nature for the Harfoots, and then a lot of paintings and artwork for the elves. So what do you guys look to?
Yeah, I mean, every single kingdom had to be specific, and we definitely work was about finding what makes so special and different from the other kingdoms, every single kingdom. So nature is always like a great inspiration in talking. And I remember that I always try to bring a sense of reality to the fantasy. For example, I remember with the elves, in general, we have a sense of elevated nature. That's something that you can find not only in talking, but in fantasy. So it's rooted in reality, but there is a sense of being more sophisticated. I remember that for the elf, for example, because they are so related to the forest and to nature. I'm from Barcelona, and of course I thought about Gaudí and the architecture. And I remember I mentioned Ramsey Avery, the production designer, and Kate Hawley, the costume designer, the interiors of the Sagrada Familia. And from there, we took the idea of creating Lindon, the kingdom of the elves, as forests that look like a cathedral, you know. So you're coming always from not talking, trying to capture the philosophy of his work, and then from your own experience of things, paintings that you remember. I remember that, of course, for dwarves, for example, I remember Eisenstein movies, Russian movies from Eisenstein, these kind of aesthetics of silent cinema from the Russian period, you know, that was a lot of fun, you know, like going back through all those references and try to somehow blend your memories from the books with your own memories from lots of different things.
Mm-hmm. This is I always find it like interesting when we get prequels to things, because the viewer, we already know what the end is, right? Like we've seen the Third Age, or we've read about it. So what is it like creating a prequel and knowing what the end result is, and you're just showing how we're getting there and embedding the prequel with enough details that the viewer can see how we get there eventually in the Third Age when it's decay and declining?
Well, we had an end. I mean, we knew how it was going to end, all those locations, all those characters. So we had to go back to the origins and try to understand what was Galadriel at that time. You know, she's a very different character from the Third Age. She's not a woman sitting on a throne in a court. She's more a more reliable character. Somehow she feels more human because she's a woman in action that commits mistakes, and in that sense, it's very exciting. You know, like knowing where you're going. You go back to the origin and try to understand, try to look for something that feels consistent with the direction you're going. I think in that sense, I really like the idea behind the show. When I first talked with Patrick and JD, and they mentioned that the story was based on the appendix, so we knew what were the great points in the story, and we were filling the gaps. So we had a direction, and we had at the same time freedom to interpret the story and bring something new to what we already know.
Sure. You directed several scenes in the Sundering Seas. Can you talk about that process? Like, I'm assuming you guys were in a water tank, but what was that like using practical effects versus visual?
Yeah, to me, the most difficult thing was to feed all those big sequences into a television schedule, because at the end, you are doing television. And I remember that, for example, for the water tank sequences, I was lucky that before doing the Lord of the Rings, I was the director of The Impossible. That was a big movie shot in a water tank. So I had the experience. I know how slow it was, but I knew how to do it. So that gave me the experience in order to face this work. You know, at the end, you know that it's a very slow process to shoot all those sequences. They are always very slow. But if you know what you want and you're very specific, there is a way of fitting that into the schedule always.
Yeah, sure. Well, Jay, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see back in a little bit. Nick Murphy, director of A Spy Among Friends. This is a true story about two spies, one of whom was a double agent for the Soviets. How familiar were you with this story before the show?
Well, everybody in the UK has heard of Kim Philby. Kim Philby was the spy you're talking about who betrayed Britain. He worked for the Russians for 30 years whilst at the very, very top of the British intelligence. So I sort of knew about him. I didn't know the details about it. It's based on a very well-regarded book by Ben McIntyre, and it was interesting hearing Jess talk earlier about his source material and the enormous 900-page thing that he had the decency to read. I never read the book because I kind of felt, no, it wasn't through laziness, although I don't read well. I didn't know enough about the story, and I wanted to keep it that way. In the sense, I wanted the script to be what I worked with. There was people, you know, the set was smothered with people who'd read the book, not least Alex Carey, who was always with me, or the writer and showrunner on the show, who was always with me on set and all that sort of stuff. So there was a high level of awareness and expertise in the subject. And I suppose I saw myself as the what if you don't know sort of figure on it. So
yeah, I think that's fitting, because it's kind of like the audience too, especially people who are not familiar with the story, and it's kind of,
I think there's a load you can take for granted. Yeah, well, I've made a lot of factual dramas, and there's a lot you can take for granted. You have to work on the assumption. You know, one of my first dramas was about Chernobyl many years ago before the big one. And you had to work on the assumption nobody had heard of Chernobyl and this sort of thing. It's a danger, and nobody is going to inherently feel it's dramatic just because it's a subject that they're supposed to know about. And I've got to also say that our drama was more the spy craft of the story was the infrastructure, the skeleton of the story, but it was really a story about friendship and this sort of betrayal of this platonic,
yeah, because there's no spycraft or actual mission there.
Yeah, and deliberately so, and yes, of course there was, because he escaped to Russia under very, very dubious circumstances, typical of the British ruling classes. They couldn't believe that one of their own was guilty, so they when they found out he was guilty, rather than just arrest him, they sent his best friend to Beirut to interrogate him, have a jolly good chat. In a safe house in Beirut for 4 days, after which he escaped. So there is a sort of an enormous question hanging over Damien's character, Nicholas Elliott. What the hell happened in Beirut? So there is a spy story, but principally woven within that is this story of heartbreak, where they both analyze the meaning of their friendship.
Yeah, and the show jumps through time through 30 years, and a ton of locations, like Beirut, like you're saying, London, Istanbul, Moscow, and
London, Moscow, Berlin, Vienna.
But what I love about it was that you guys didn't even bother doing chyrons to situate the viewer. You were just you told it visually.
Do you know what? We didn't. We jump around. It's a non-linear story, and we very early decided not to do that. I used to make documentaries, and we'd constantly put the name of the person talking up, and we'd say this and that. No one ever read them. No one ever read. You don't need to pause a documentary and go, his name is Professor so-and-so, and her name is Professor so-and-so. We were jumping around so much that it was actually going to be unhelpful, in the sense of people are constantly looking down, and so instead I went for a visual code of a sort of slight grade difference. We were emulating film stocks for different eras. The whole thing's set in 1963. Principally, the story is set in 1963. So we emulated Kodachrome 64, and then reversal stock for Beirut, and then Ektachrome 100 for, you know, a different stock for Moscow. So you feel the change, and plus design changes, and Paul Spriggs, the designer, sort of made sure that there was a sort of manifest change in palette and that sort of stuff, very subtle. And then, so ultimately in the story, you don't need to know dates. You just need to know it happened before or it happened after.
Right.
And I think
and I think it's a fitting choice, because it is like the framing device is Lily, a composite character, interrogating Damien mostly, and it's his character trying to just like recalibrate his own relationship with Kim, like, and figure it out. And he in his mind is not going to think about it linearly himself either.
Well, memory doesn't. I was interested in the whole thing about the way memory works, and this is why the memories we have in the show are mute. I've got this feeling that I don't think memories have sound for some reason, and so these images that roll through people's minds are always never sublimate the audio of the present scene. But the invented character of Lily was in deliberately to create a foil, to present the alternative of what these men and their lives were, which is male, white, toxic, in all those ways. And this woman was everything that represents the future for, and the service had to become, intelligence service had to become more like her and less like what had caused the problems, whether it has or not. You don't need to look far beyond Boris Johnson's term in office to know that we still have the same problem, but nonetheless, that was the point that Alex was trying to make.
Mm-hmm. I also like that you basically see like inverted relationships between the three of them, because it's like one relationship or friendship destroyed with Kim and Nick, and then he and Lily eventually become friends by the end. You know, it's like he kind of warms up to her by the end of the show. So what was that something you guys were thinking about too, just showing how
absolutely there's those two ships pass. I mean, what was important is that we felt that the audience are the ones that spot all that. When you are making a constructed deceit like that, it's important the audience feel the authors of it, and so that the entire, this goes for the drama in general, the relationship between the camera and the story was really one of eyewitness. It wasn't one of storyteller. It's interesting to hear talking about Power of Rings, which is that you are a storyteller, and that's very much part of the strength of it. This is much more of a, you're in the room with people with a problem, and what you infer from that, and you only learn it as they learn it. We at no stage does the camera know more than the characters in question, for example. So that those sort of formations of friendships, you feel you're the one that's spotting it, and that remained important from the outset, that we never overstepped our brief in sense of people are trying to get a measure of the situation. I didn't want the filmmaker to feel more in control than the characters were. That makes sense.
Sure. I don't believe you've worked with Damien before, have you?
No, we got on very well, Damien and I, very quickly. We support the same football team, which doesn't hurt. Let me tell you, if you know a little bit about
That's how you bonded. So.
Right, we bonded at Anfield in Liverpool. No, I haven't, but I've worked with Guy before. Guy and I did A Christmas Carol for FX a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. He played Scrooge in Steve Knight's show of that. So he and I knew each other, and we're already very close and trusting. And Damien is very, well, he was a producer on the show as well. So my creative relationship with him was very long within the schedule. I wasn't just gaining an actor in the last week of rehearsal. I had him from the outset, and indeed he had me. So we got very close in that way, and still are, you know.
Yeah, because I was wondering, like, what was it like working with him as like throughout the production, because he does have to play this character who's and he does it so well, like he's just confused about this betrayal by his friend.
Yeah, he's a nightmare. No, he's delicious. He's delightful. Well, I think what's extraordinary about his character, and this goes for a lot of the sort of posh culture, that English culture that is well documented, is it doesn't express emotion well. They don't gush. And so Damien had the unenviable task of being the emotional core for the audience, the emotional sort of barometer for the audience in terms of the impact it's having on him. Nobody is there discussing his feelings. So you are only going off what he is giving you, but he is playing a man who doesn't give off much. So those two things are completely in conflict. And I think that's what he managed extremely well. What I will say is he having grown up, lucky enough to grow up in a very similar, he went to the same school as these guys. He knows that type. I also went to a private boarding school in England, and we know that type, and so that the traits that we could use to tell our story were known to us, even though we couldn't codify them. We both knew we both knew the people that we were depicting, even if we didn't necessarily calibrate and codify empirically what it was these people are.
Right.
And indeed, Lily, for her part, is I don't know how well she's known in America. She's a phenomenally well-known, well-regarded actress here, and is purely intuitive and purely in the moment. So all three behave in very different ways on set. Their process is very different. But as the other guys will tell you, that can often really help the dynamic between cast if they're all working in different ways. It's not always simpatico that works. It's they all got on very, very well socially, but their approach was very different, and that I think helped us.
Oh, for sure. Well, Nick, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit. Thank you. I'm Delaney, director of Ted Lasso and Gutsy. I want to start with Ted Lasso. You've directed episodes in every season. What has it been like to work on an ongoing show like this, having been there from the beginning before anyone even saw the show?
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's this show in particular is just it's such a lovely bunch of people, and we've all just been a sort of happy family from the start. And so I guess like being able to go 3 seasons with them has been, it was so good from the get-go in terms of the dynamic behind the scenes, that you kind of build on that and get to know each other. And then because we've been so lucky to be able to do all of this kind of award circuit and for your consideration stuff and stuff like that, so we get all this bonus time together as well in between shooting. Not that there is a lot of time in between, to be honest. I think it might be the longest season of television ever shot, season 3. So, but yeah, it's I remember because I did the opening block this season at the wrap party, Jason saying to me, he was like, I feel like our muscle memory is saying that this should be the premiere, just because it had been so long since we started. But yeah, it's been a joy. It's been lovely.
Mm-hmm. Do you you directed the first 2 episodes this season, so do you get the pick of the litter now when you come back, or is it just mostly comes down to scheduling?
Yeah, and the scheduling on Lasso is kind of infamously chaotic, so we sort of you get what you have a certain block, and then you have another block, and then it's sort of everyone does a little bit of everybody else's blocks, and we're kind of constantly signing DGA waivers to be able to pick up for each other, and it's a big, happy, dysfunctional family. But yeah, I did historically. I've always brought up the rear and done like the last episodes, penultimate episodes, and so this was the first time doing the beginning, which for me was really nice because I usually do like the crying at the end.
This time you get to introduce new characters, new settings.
Yeah, and it's also like the sillier end of Lasso. Like it's like the big ensemble set pieces, like the kind of just the more, it's like when the stakes are still low and it could be a bit silly and sort of freewheeling and fun. And so it was really nice to kind of, it's the same show, but I'm doing a different show, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. You directed Zava's incredible entrance in the second episode and I kind of love the way you shot it, because he comes in during their game, or their match rather, and it's like shot from a distance. It's like he's like this unknowable soccer god, and we don't get up close to him until Rebecca corners him at the urinal. So how did you guys design that shot and meeting him and you seeing him off in the distance talking to Rupert?
Yeah, I guess it's because he kind of means a different thing to so many different characters at that point. And so you've got Roy, who's sort of, his moment kind of gets interrupted by him. And then you've got Rebecca, who's watching Rupert, and then Higgins, who's obviously got his own involvement in that. And then you also have Jamie watching from the pitch and Danny kind of getting overexcited, and sort of Jamie ending, he's the sort of the only one, but ends up kind of being right, out of everyone, the only one that isn't starstruck. And so, yeah, it was it was really like seeing what Max was doing with that character and the kind of very little glimpses that I got in that, because he is this sort of, even when he speaks for the first time, he does it in the context of a press conference. So you're still not really seeing him. He's like through a TV. But I was so jealous of Destiny getting the next episode, because I've read bits, like the bits where he like kisses Higgins and like grabs his face, and I was like, oh man, like once I saw what Max was doing with that character, I was like, oh, it's going to be so much fun for Destiny in the next block to be able to do once he's in full flight.
You're like, can we switch? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as switching over to Gutsy, this is a docuseries with Hillary and Chelsea Clinton. How did you get involved?
I got involved thanks to Anna Chai, the showrunner, who I will be forever grateful to, who thought that I could do it despite having no history in documentary. Sort of believed in me. She had like all of the themes had kind of been decided for the different episodes, and they had this women in comedy or just a comedy theme through it. And she wanted it to have its own identity and to bring in someone from that world more. I think just make it funny, because you had all these funny women in it. And then the Clintons themselves, particularly Hillary, is like really funny, which there was so much of doing that show that I was amazed at how different the impression you get of her. I mean, as someone who, I live in America, I don't get a vote, but would have wholeheartedly voted for her. But even someone that would have voted for her, like just, the impression you have of her as a person was so different to the experience of meeting her. And like one of her most like memorable characteristics is she has this like raucous, dirty laugh that she just like is constantly laughing, and it's like a really contagious, really rambunctious, like proper, like deep, like laugh. And I think so. As soon as I got to know her, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to showcase this in this episode. And I think that was kind of Anna's. I think having got to know them, having like been in the weeds with them for ages in the pre-production of like putting this show together and deciding what it would be, I think she obviously had the same experience of like, oh, this is an opportunity for her to shine in a way that we haven't seen her before. And so wanted to bring on someone that was more from the comedy world than the doc world, I think. But yes, she did that, and then was very, very helpful in holding my hand through learning quite how different it is.
Yeah. Well, what was it like directing Hillary and Chelsea, who aren't normally in front of the camera this way? Like they're usually the ones being interviewed, but now they're the interviewer, primarily Hillary, like interviewing all those comedians, the clown in Paris. Like, did you have to give them a lot of direction, or was it something they kind of picked up quickly?
I mean, no, because both of them, where they are very similar, is that they are both like incredibly hardworking women, and so they just like they knew what their role was. They'd obviously been interviewed a bunch of times, so they knew what made for a good interviewer and like how to do it well. And they just like worked their socks off to make the scene as good as it could possibly be. They were also both of them were very adamant throughout the process that this shouldn't be a show about them. It was supposed to be a show about the contributors. And so I think that they were cognizant of the fact that because of who they are, it can quite quickly, the lens can kind of flip back around on them. And so part of them kind of like working to be good interviewers was to avoid that as much as they could. It was like their way of protecting what they wanted the show to be. But yeah, there was I definitely watched some where there was those, you get some interviewees where it's like, if it's just a kind of open-ended discussion, they don't really contribute unless they're invited to, or if it's a yes or no answer, they'll just say yes or no. And you really have to like,
be like pull teeth
on the other side to keep it going, which I'm sure you know very well. And both Hillary and Chelsea really put the work in to get it going. They're also just like incredibly intelligent women, and so almost impossible to have an uninteresting conversation with them.
Yeah, and they had great rapport with everybody. And yeah, like you said, like they really seemed invested in like the interviewees' experience and tone.
Yeah, and I think for Hillary in particular, she's incredibly adept at, I mean, I certainly have it. Like when you first meet her, you have that like, oh my God, it's Hillary Clinton, Jesus Christ. And she is so good at immediately putting people at ease, just being very, very warm, very, very natural and chatty, and kind of bringing people out of themselves, which definitely helps. And I think it's something that's innate to people, but also she must encounter that with every single person she ever meets, you know. And the show just wouldn't have worked if that, for cast or crew, if that had lasted longer than the initial meeting. And she did a good job of getting people to kind of like settle in and be relaxed with her.
Yeah. Well, MJ, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit. Thank you. Jake Schreier, you directed 6 of the 10 episodes of Beef. How did you and Lee Sung-jin allocate which ones you were going to direct?
That's a really good question. I think it was just sort of, when I first came on, it was maybe going to be spread out differently. And then once we started crossboarding and I kind of had to take on more episodes, sort of just whatever made sense within the kind of overall production schedule. And then he had promised me episode 9. He was like, episode 9 is going to be crazy. You can have that one.
That's the best one, if I do say so myself.
Oh, hey, we'll take it. We'll take it. Yeah.
I mean, that is the climactic episode, kind of. There's a crazy turning point, a hostage situation coming to a head. And I know Sonny has said that in his original script, there were a lot more deaths, but you and other people talked him out of it.
There were definitely more deaths. There were a lot of deaths. I think like there were even more deaths before even the script that we read. It was sort of like in discussion form, and then it got sort of weeded down, and then there were just like a couple left, and then we got it down to a smaller number. I mean, I would have gone with it either way, but I think that to some degree, like I think when he was first coming up with that, they were characters on a page, and then by the time he was finishing episode 9, it was one of the few scripts that he didn't have written before we started. And you actually get to know those characters, it becomes a lot harder to kill them off, So I think that was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. What was you said you were crossboarding the episode. So what was the prep like for this episode with, you have a large action set piece in the middle, and it's the biggest scope of all the episodes, really. And it's violent too. So what was the prep like?
Yeah, I mean, it was, that one, we were lucky enough that like episode 9 is relatively contained. I mean, we were sort of at Jordan's house for a little bit longer than that episode, but predominantly we got to do that one on a block, which was nice, especially just to even kind of keep the action going and figure it out. But it wasn't like we had more time for it. I mean, it was still kind of a sprint, and we sort of relied on that idea of, character perspective, which we used a lot on the show, where like, we didn't actually have like a very massive SWAT unit outside of that house, but you also kind of want to be with the characters and inside, and not really from an objective or omniscient perspective. And we sort of used that to kind of match the scale to what we could pull off and feel it more from how the characters were seeing it. And I guess just invest our time in chair throws and things like that, chases.
Mm-hmm. I love Jordan's death scene, and I think everyone is grossed out by it, even though you don't see the gore at all. But I think it's just hearing her bones being crushed, and it just sounds gross. But yeah, how did you guys go about shooting that?
Yeah, you can blame Larkin for that one. I mean, I think in the initial script, it was just that she was crushed, and then Larkin, our incredible DP, had this idea that if you were just sort of going back and forth between Michael and Naomi reacting to that if the door just closed in the foreground of that, that would be like a very fun way to not show a death. And I think that, we were grossed out too, but I think the idea was just too good to pass up on that. Yeah. I think I saw Ashley again the other day, and she was like, I didn't actually know that that's what was happening. I thought she was just crushed. So she's like, I'm glad I had him process that I was in there with half of the body for the rest of the episode. So
that's hilarious. Well, at the end of the episode, you do like a bookend chase scene between Danny and Amy. And going back to what you were saying before about character perspective, this one is different than the first one in the premiere, because it's you see both of them, because the first one is mostly from Danny's perspective, because we haven't met Amy yet and he doesn't know who he's chasing, but we see both of them in 9, and there's a lot of wide shots. It's like much more neutral. So what went into decision to shoot it that way in that chase?
Yeah, I think, you know, we talked a lot about that, about, you know, because there are these bookends, right? They're in sort of upgraded versions of the red truck and the white SUV. It's like a red Hummer now, and like a fancy, it's a G-Wagon, but same kind of cars. And I think it was just this idea, and we talked a lot about whether we should remain more kind of super character perspective grounded. But I think it was this idea that at this point in the story and the way the music, you know, and Sonny had written Bjork into the script, and so it's not your average high octane chase music, but that there was this sense that these two characters will do this forever. You know what I mean? If something doesn't interject, if something doesn't change, if something doesn't stop it. And so there was this kind of rare time, and there is this one kind of high wide shot before they go out over the edge that's kind of meant to suggest that. Like, it's one of the few times. And then episode 10, which Sonny directed, like also has a lot of higher angles, which we've never used in the show before.
The final shot.
that for sure. And even earlier when they're stranded there, and it's just kind of this idea of maybe we can finally step back from this and see, you know, after such a crazy episode, like consider how sort of nuts this is, and how kind of like look at them in a smaller way of like, this will continue unless something changes, which it does in 10.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, it's like more universal, and now they're finally in the finale, they're addressing their issue.
Or you could just look at it as Crow POV, which is maybe more fun.
That's true. But I mean, when they started talking in the teaser, I was like, yeah.
No.
Well, you mentioned Bjork. I love all the needle drops in this show, and at the end of all of your episodes, you have a lot of great ones. You have Cornflake Girl, Steven singing Drive, Machine Head for the basketball game, Somewhere Only We Know for the fire, Mockingbirds in 8. So, and you've directed a ton of music videos too. So how did that inform you here in the edit when you're syncing music to picture of what you want to show and where to cut and how much of the song do you want to use?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing that was fortunate about it is that Sonny did have all of those written in the script, except maybe Machine Head. I think that was the one I got in, was that for some reason, like the basketball needed like a slight different contrast. But just having all of that ahead of time, you know, it means that you can plan out, like, you know, we had a real sense, and Sonny and I would talk about it. He had such a particular sense of where he wanted those drops to happen and at what moment in the song he wanted to cut to title card, that you could sort of plan out those shots around it, you know, and you could kind of design like the end of 2 to line up with Tori Amos in the way that you wanted it to, or you could do that, especially in episode 8. Like, we would talk a lot about, all right, this is where this lands and this is how Danny should be looking when it does. So you could approach it a little bit more like a music video, but only if you know what your piece of music is before you go into it. So yeah, we were lucky to have that from Sonny.
Do you have a favorite needle drop?
I mean, it's not in my episode, but I do think, I mean, Hoobastank was not written into the scripts, but I do remember in the edit
that's
when
my
Harry
favorite.
and Sonny,
I was like, that's when I was like, I'm in.
because you don't want to like it. And we would talk a lot about, I mean, it changes by the end. Like, Bjork is just that all of the music sort of needed to be great, but also just have a tiny element of cringe that you can't help but smile at it. And I think like when Harry and Sonny found that, like, it kind of really defined like how the rest of them needed to feel going forward.
Definitely. Well, Amy and Danny don't actually share the screen that much throughout the show, but they're constantly connected via their phones, like just trolling each other, catfishing texts and stuff. And I think you guys, this is one of the better shows at incorporating tech and like smartphone stuff. So how did you guys go about deciding what would you show practically and what you would do with like as an overlay on screen?
Wasn't very scientific. I mean, basically I think Sonny wanted to do everything sort of practically shot off the phone going in, and I was like, there's just, especially for what we were trying to do and the way you compose these shots and hanging in them longer, it's like you're just not going to want to cut into inserts that much. So I was trying to convince him of that, but then we basically shot inserts for everything and then also planned it for the wides and then just kind of balanced it out in the edit where it felt right. But I think that like there was a lot of discussion, even just beyond the tech, of like just, you know, character position, especially in episode 2, like how we kind of position them opposite each other, even if you don't notice, like, you know, for the whole chair sequence, Amy is always, at the party is always right to left and Danny's always left to right. And it sort of feels like connecting them across
Yeah, it's like
space.
subliminal when they're like.
Yeah,
even
like we tried to
not
do that where
in
we
space.
could make it feel like we knew, it's like, yes, they're not together much and we're going to save those moments for you, but we're also going to make it feel as though we know that they're sort of connected across, across the story.
Mhm, for sure. Well, Jake, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to our Meet the Experts Directors panel. Today, we are joined by Jake Schreier from Beef, Jesse Peretz from City on Fire, David Paul Meyer from The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Jay Bayona from The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Nick Murphy from A Spy Among Friends, and MJ Delaney from Ted Lasso and Gutsy. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by going way back. What was the first thing you guys directed? It doesn't have to be professionally. It could just be something you made when you were a kid on like Super 8. Jesse, why don't we start with you?
I got a Super 8 camera during high school, and I think I definitely did a couple like silent mood things or whatever, but my first movie with dialogue was called This Chicken is Phenomenal. And
Right, I love it. It's one of my favorites.
and and it has a
Oscar, come
cameo,
on.
and it has a cameo, probably the most noteworthy thing of it has a cameo by my godfather, Fred Wiseman, as a butcher in it.
Amazing. Where can we see that?
Nowhere.
Not streaming anywhere?
If you
No.
come over to my house and I can find somewhere it's digitized, but I was 16 years old when I made that.
Jay, how about you?
I remember that the first time I had a camera, I was like 12 or something like that. And I wanted to have a camera since I was very little. And the first thing I asked my cousin to put himself in front of the camera, and I asked him to stay there for 10 seconds. And then I stopped the camera. I asked him to leave. And then I keep on recording the camera. And then we watched together the shot. And I saw my cousin disappearing. And my cousin was like 5 or 6. And he was like totally in shock, like, what happened there? And I was like, wow, that's cinema. that's the first thing I did with a camera.
Amazing effects, really.
Yeah.
Nick, how about you?
I wasn't that young because I've been intending to be a timber importer. Long story, but I realized I didn't want to do that. I'd been a cameraman and an editor of news and current affairs, and then I was sort of asked to go and follow this fire brigade in Merseyside up in Liverpool, and a cat was missing, and I was just directing from there, so I sort of fell into it, and we found the cat, but we didn't find the cat where they expected it to be. It's actually one of the best sequences I've ever shot, because the cat was actually under the video recorder, but they'd ripped the house to pieces and pulled walls down trying to find this kitten.
Oh my
and
God.
It was underneath the corner of the living room. But that was it. I fell into that, and of course I'd love to pretend that everything was just completely smooth after that, but it wasn't. I just did. There's no logic I can retrofit to my career. I just did the best.
It started because of a cat, so
it started because of a cat. I like that. Yeah. That kitten hadn't gone missing. Yeah.
You know, we've got chicken and cat already. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
What other animals will we have? David, how about you?
So for mine, the one that I remember is I ran for, in high school, student class president, I think it was, in my junior year. So I was around 16, and we had to make a video. I had to make a campaign video, or like a vote, campaign video. So my friend had a camera. We stayed after school one day and just like in the school hallways shot just ridiculous. Nothing about what my platform would be, just like us trying to look cool on the camera. And then I think the teacher helped us put Staying Alive by the Bee Gees on. Somehow we figured out how to put music on the video, and that was and then it was played in high school. We had the TVs in all the classrooms where they had like a central way to play stuff. So they played that was my first screening too, I guess. They played it for all the class, and that was how people could see your campaign video and decide if they wanted to vote for you.
Did they vote for you?
They did, yeah. I won. I beat the other guy's video. Wasn't, I mean,
It wasn't, they didn't have Staying Alive. MJ, how about you?
I also wasn't very young because I sort of fell into this fortuitously. But I used to do backstage filming at London Fashion Week for different designers. It was before it was even stuff going online. It was like when like magazines were doing like iPad versions. And it was such an afterthought, the idea that they'd have these huge big budget stills campaigns for like proper photographers. And then they were like, oh, like, I guess have something moving. I was like, I'll do it. Like it was, and I'd run around with a 5D, and obviously it's like 5'11" models in 7-inch heels, and I'm in like trainers. And so I used to run around with a collapsible chair because they always wanted shots of the hair and makeup, but I could never like get to eye level. So I used to, if you ever want to feel small,
brilliant.
Run around there. It was like uncollapse this chair, clamber up on it, get the shot, and then scurry off with my chair. But yeah, it was great fun.
Oh my God, how heavy was that chair?
It was just one of those little like metal collapsible things. You could put it over a shoulder and then the camera on the other one, and then just sort of like.
That might have made you shorter, maybe. It's like, it's so heavy. It's Jake, how about you?
Yeah, I think it was some kind of like Pulp Fiction knockoff interlocking stories thing I did in high school, and I found my old JVC like camcorder, like mini DV camcorder, like cleaning out a storage locker the other day, and the tape marks were still on it from taping it off to be 235. It's very pretentious for a high school kid. So I had to have widescreen. Anyway, not good.
Did you watch it after you found it?
Oh, I don't think the movie was still on. I don't even think the camcorder works. I think it would eat up any mini DV tape you would put in there, but it exists at least still. So it was there.
Well, can you guys think of an instance throughout your career when something in a scene or a shot came alive on screen better than you could have even imagined or storyboarded? It doesn't necessarily have to have been something you thought was going to turn out bad, but it was just the final product, or when you called cut, that was way better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like and especially on Beef, like there's so many moments with Steven. I mean, that's what's so nice about working with great actors, right? Is that you kind of go into a scene with an idea of what it could be, and then the greatest joy. And especially like I'm a relatively technical filmmaker and like to plan out shots, and it's nice that people can hit beats, but to have an actor that can do that and then bring this whole other side of it that you weren't imagining or didn't expect, and you watch the thing actually come to life. As opposed to
is it just like kind of you thought maybe like a line would be read a certain way, and then they surprise you with their.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to go. And sorry, I don't want to. Other people should speak, but I mean, I try not to go in like with a perfectly imagined way of the way any line should be, as long as it feels honest. But then, like when you get to see what that is, and yeah, when it isn't what you were imagining, and you're like, oh yeah, that's even better. It's a pretty special thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think people. You got to go in with a plan, as Jake said, but because people panic if you don't have a plan. But it's when something better happens, which it frequently does. If we are working with this is why filmmaking is so wonderful, because you collaborate with people who are the experts and make your ideas better. I forget what mine was. I literally I can't remember who. When actors have filled a role, I can't remember who I thought might play the role. If I saw a scene a certain way, it's like I can imagine going on holiday, and as soon as I actually see the hotel, I forget what I thought the hotel was going to be like. I'm in the real hotel. I think filmmaking is a little bit like that. I forget, and then I just claim credit for it.
You steal everyone's ideas, and yeah. Jesse.
I mean, I would say, I made it was probably 23 years ago. I made right after the Thomas Vinterberg movie, the Celebration came out. I got money from this company, Green Street Films, to make. They were giving filmmakers $500,000 to make films on digital, but that really, prehistoric digital cameras. So I made an all improvised movie in France with Paul Rudd and Romany Malco, and then a French cast, and it was called The Chateau. and the conceit and how to get the money, you had to pitch something you would never be able to do with 35 millimeter. So I pitched, I will have a French cast, an American cast come together. They will never rehearse together. And there's just an outline of what it would be. And I had incredible confidence about this idea up until about 3 days before we started shooting. And then suddenly the terror set in and I thought, oh my God, this actually is a lot of money for someone who really, I have no idea what will happen if it doesn't work. But that was probably the scariest thing of like being a vague plan. And then it was all just it was like 13 days, we shot the whole feature, and it was like every day writing it as we were making it. So anyways, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that was sort of the biggest thing of like, I don't know what it is to really incredibly joyful.
It was kind of like improv-ish.
Yeah. I mean, it was all improv, basically.
Yeah. David, how about you?
Yeah, so before I did the studio directing for the show, I was directing a lot of the sketches, the pre-recorded stuff for the Daily Show. And Roy Wood Jr., one of our correspondents, had this idea that he was going to write a rap song just based entirely on real quotes from Donald Trump. So he wrote this song, and we're like, oh, that's fun. The song was very funny. We're like, yeah, this is funny. This is clever. Okay, let's shoot a music video for it. Okay, cool. So we did a music video, and Roy just really, it was just so epic. We were like, oh, this is way bigger scale, and he just was like, no, this is my thing. He had like a Trump wig, and we had these like locations and everything. But really, what's most compelling is just how serious he was about rapping and delivering those quotes as a rapper. And his performance just, because Trump quotes are already in and of themselves unique, let's say. And Roy so it's hard to like one up Trump, right? He's kind of his own. So
he made it art.
Yeah, he's his own. So for Roy to come in and spin him in this new way, it was special. So yeah, that really went way above and beyond what I thought that project would be.
Yeah, sure. J.A., how about you?
To me, I would say the same about the actors, because I grew up very obsessed with the technical aspects of cinema. But the more I work with actors, the more I enjoy directing, and to me would be, there's always a moment when you're shooting a story that the actor disappears and you only see the characters. There is no performance anymore. I remember shooting moments with Naomi Watts and Tom Holland in The Impossible, or shooting in my other films. In all my movies, always there's a moment that there is no performance anymore. And I got very emotional in those moments, because you capture a sense of reality. You always try to feed the actors and give them enough space to allow them to do their work. And when the actors disappear and you only see the character, and you see something that feels that is really happening in front of camera, to me is the most wonderful feeling when I'm working.
Yeah, completely.
MJ, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree. I think in terms of like the unexpected happening, I think one of the nicest moments is when you do scenes where it's like the whole crew's read the sides. We know the scene. If you're weeks and weeks into the shoot, you know the characters, like you feel like you know what's coming, and then the actor does it, and there's like this moment when you walk out where the whole crew is just like silent for a moment because they did something totally unexpected. It's not even necessarily that different, it's just so much better than what you thought was going to happen. And it's always like, it's just one of the most magical things. But I was thinking the first thing that came to my head when you said it was, you also sometimes get that from like the weather or the light. Like I was shooting a Disney show this year called Renegade Now, and it's about a highway woman, and we were in this forest and we're all lined up. She's about to like hijack this carriage that's coming over. We've got the two cameras behind her, but we teched it on a completely different time of day. It's like first thing in the morning. We've pumped this forest full of atmos, and then suddenly like the sun comes up and just these beams of light come like pouring through all these tall trees, and it was that thing where it wasn't even just me and the DP, like the whole crew looks at each other. It's like, quick, up the hill, up the hill. Everyone's like scrambling up the hill to like create this wide that no one had ever planned for. But it was just like, we had to stop what we were doing and film that, because it was just like Mother Nature just kind of showed up, and it was like, we have to get this. So yeah, stuff like that, the unexpected can come, which is always so lovely as well.
Do you guys find the other signal that's happened is not, the crew aren't always completely engaged. Most of the crew aren't always completely engaged with what's happening, but you have those moments where you can tell the sparks are drawn in. The guys who are standing on lampstands, everybody has sort of gravitated round to the drama when normally they wouldn't, and even commented on it afterwards. And that's, you know, something
magical moments.
You find that there's magical moments where you suddenly feel.
Like,
sorry, MJ.
People have migrated over to your monitor.
Yeah, there's that. We all
suddenly you've got like a little crowd. It's like, you know, it's going well.
yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, that's
I do something that is very effective. I shoot with music on set. So when you play music, there is
really
you create like a moment that everybody's in the tone of the scene. And it's so beautiful because everybody's so focusing what's going on, because they have a total experience of the sequence. They understand the tone and they are going through the emotion. It's also very helpful for the actors. And it's something that I read that Charlie Chaplin used to do, or Sergio Leone, and I started to do in my movies, and I'm totally engaged with that idea. I really enjoy to do that.
What did you play on Lord of the Rings?
Well, I play lots of different things. For example, there was a scene that the rock breaking contest. It was all the dwarves like making this contest where they are breaking rocks, and it's very raw. And I was playing "We Will Rock You" from Queen all the time on set, and all the guys were singing the song quite loud on set. And then when I say action, I turn off the song and we will start the scene. And that gave the actors and not also the actors, but the crew a feeling of what the scene was.
Awesome. Well, lastly, is there a shot or a scene from something else, nothing you've ever done, but just you as a viewer, where you saw it and you thought, wow, how did they shoot that?
How did they technically shoot it?
Yeah, or just like how did they get this? They create this shot, you know, this final.
At the end of sorry if I jump in. At the end of forgive me if this doesn't answer your question. At the end of Dr. Zhivago, he sees her leave, and it's against this sort of large grey monolithic walls of the Soviet city they're in, and it's a composition I can't work out what made them pick that. It's so incredible, and it's so not a traditional piece of composition, and I don't know why I keep thinking about it. It's the sort of shot I would dream of being smart enough to pick. But it is as your end shot of the movie, it's unpitchable. It sounds dreary. It sounds wrong for a massive movie like that, but it's unbelievable. And I think about that a lot. Where I can't fathom the creative process that went into how great that is, rather than I can figure out how they technically did it, but just his genius.
That it perfectly answers. That's exactly what I mean. Just something that just stays with you like that, and you're like, how did they do that? Jesse, how about you?
Oh wow. I mean, you know, what's interesting is like I feel like that the kind of shots that really excite me tend to be much more just about capturing a more intimate moment, you know what I mean? But in terms of like, but those, you know, so whether it's, I don't know, like I was thinking, oh, this isn't a good answer to the question, but like there's that moment in Mauvais Song with like I'm now forgetting the French director's name, but a young Julie Delpy is like running into the train station and she's chasing, and now I'm forgetting the actor's name, so I'm doing a great job telling the story, but he hops on the train and the door shuts and there's this like shot of her in the window, and like those are the kind of things where I'm just like, those are the kind of things that move me the most. And I would say more in terms of the things that I can't even fathom, you know, just like recently I watched I watched Apocalypse Now with my 16-year-old daughter, and that movie is just filled with so many epic moments that you can't even. I just look at that and I'm just, it's where you're humbled as a director, just thinking, I can't even imagine how you have the brain to even be able to begin.
Why do I bother? Why do I
Yeah. And I mean, I think that to me, in terms of a movie that I truly love, is just filled with those moments that are so humbling to me as a director, just seeing that vision and the ability to execute something on that with so many moving parts, and such stylistic
and so unpretentious. It's such an unpretentious film. It's just
yeah.
Jake, how about you?
I think pretty much any shot from Y Tu Mamá También, obviously like Cuarón has done much more kind of fantastic wonders in Children of Men and things after that, but then you go back and watch that film and this sort of blend of, you don't even think of it, and then you realize like how complicated the camera choreography is, and you aren't thinking about that because the moments feel about as lived in and real as what you would normally you'd have to shoot hose down for that. You'd have to just cover it and edit it and find those pieces later, and yet the camera's leading you through their lives and then into the lives of these side characters and making a commentary, and it's all so well put together without any sense of showiness. And I think like the combination of it, I mean, I'm excited about all of those ideas, and to see it all put together, like I remember being like very, very baffled once I kind of started putting that movie together as to how they made it.
Yeah, definitely. David? Yeah.
So I went to USC for film school, and I had one of my professors is just very adamant about us understanding how good we had it compared to previously. So they were like, we have computers, let's just start there. So we watched, I mean, I always loved the opening sequence of A Touch of Evil just because it was just so hard and strenuous to do it. And I know that's kind of like an easy one to throw out there, but I remember like watching it and being like, wow, because it was done in the 50s. And then even further back, we watched A Trip to the Moon, which is like 1902, I think, is very old. And they were like, look at these special effects. And we're like, yeah, okay, whatever, it's going to be ridiculous. But there's actually really impressive stuff that's, all done in camera, or they did some weird processes where just that creativity to where we were like, wow, like considering they had absolutely nothing to work with when you compare to what we have now is like endless resources. It was always, and so they were like, so don't complain to us if we don't give you the nicest camera to make your student film with. So that was
look what they did in 1902. So.
Yeah, exactly.
JA?
There's a movie that I love. I love to work with kids, and I've worked a lot with kids. And there's a movie that I love from Francois Truffaut called Pocket Money. I think is the American title. And it's a movie about childhood. It's a movie. There is almost no story. It's just like sequences of kids, long conversations. And I still love to go back to that movie and try to figure out how he did that film, because there are long sequences with kids, very young kids, like 5 years, 6 years, where they follow the dialogue, and there are no cuts, so there are scenes made in one shot. And it's incredible how the kids are in that film. And I really love to go back to that film and try to figure out how he was able to get those performances from so with kids that age, that young,
Are you saying kids are difficult? What do you, I mean?
Definitely not kids or animals. So. MJ, how about you?
I like when there's obviously the big kind of the it's like, oh, the big one shot and those big sort of glory director moments. But I remember sitting in Detroit and thinking how on earth did they block these extras? When you just see the unsung heroes, the AD department, just pulling something out where it's brilliant in the way that it disappears, where it's just you're sitting there thinking, this must have been so difficult. And yet I'm just on this journey and I'm not even noticing it, it's but it's just, I thought of that when you said it, because it was like it was one of the ones where I left the cinema and was like, I would just love to sit down with the third AD and just ask how they did this.
Just grilled them, but how did you shoot this? Yeah. Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap, but thank you so much for your time. Congratulations again on all of your projects, and have a good day.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.